Okay. Well, we can go ahead and get started if y'all are ready.
Let's do it.
Hang on just a second. I have made a little PowerPoint. Keep us on track.
I think it's worth noting Jeremy looks very dressed up for the occasion.
Seriously.
You're dressed up.
Just for you, Ben.
Likewise.
You know, it's funny. I don't see any clients in my office. So I go in and it's just me and my business partner there. Even our receptionist and any other employees, like our intern, was working from home and whatnot. So it's just us there. And he comes in like a baseball hat turned around backwards and just whatever shirt he can find and blue jeans. And I still wear like my lawyer suit because I want to feel like I'm in my space. Yeah.
I would be wearing pajamas.
Yeah. I don't feel right if I'm not dressed up.
Helps you do your job, you know. All right. Can you all see that? Okay. Would somebody mind just briefly opening us in prayer?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you for the people gathered here tonight. For the reason that we're here. For our city, for the people in it. For those who look like us and those who don't. May we listen to your voice tonight, and may your spirit be present among us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jeremy. Y'all just let me know. You might remember this from last time. I get very, suddenly I'll just be very cognizant that my kid is right over here. Another reason we need to move. And I'll get nervous. I'm about to wake him up. And so I can get a little hushed. So let me know if you can't hear me because I can always move somewhere else. All right. So we have called this, I think that back when y'all were putting this together months ago, kind of the syllabus for this fall, this title, From Colorblind to Race Conscious Parenting, actually comes from, and I'm going to go here so you can see this. It comes from this book called Raising White Kids by Jennifer Harvey. Do you know this?
Yeah, we have that book.
Yes, you have this book. Okay. So most of what I'm about to say, I hope it's been a while since you've read it, comes almost directly from this book. It's really good. Jennifer Harvey is, she's a theologian, really. And you know, we'll say, you know, she's been doing anti-racism work really from a theological perspective for a long time. And it wasn't until she became a parent herself that she realized sort of one of the way I hear it is she went looking for resources and didn't find enough that she liked. So she decided to write the book herself. So that's kind of what's gathered here. And we're really going to focus on kind of the first part of this book, which is this colorblind to race conscious parenting. So first, though, I'm going to read this first. This is an anonymous quote that she lifts up pretty early on. And we'll get the fuller picture in a minute here. But this woman says, I really don't think it's good for them to focus on people's race and put them in boxes. Sorry about that typo. And put them in boxes. Isn't that the opposite of what we should be trying to do? Sorry, this is not all quite in the order that I thought it was. Okay, so I actually want to show you something just to give you kind of a illustration on maybe the why of I don't know, why this is important. She doesn't actually lift up this example, but it came to mind. I think it's probably pretty hard to go through even any high school psychology class without seeing this example. I think you guys will probably recognize it, but it is an experiment that has been
Which doll is the
repeated a number of times.
We can't see it, Sarah.
which doll is the
Sarah, we can't see it.
Oh,
which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is
sorry, y'all.
But
You know why you can't see it? Because I have to stop sharing this so that I can start sharing the other screen. This is actually really good that y'all are having to struggle through this with me, because we're going to be doing a Christmas Eve service via Zoom at 10 p.m. on Christmas Eve. And I think that we thought we'd be able to do what I just tried to do there and failed at. So, and that'll be a lot harder within the context of worship.
well, no failure at screen sharing can be worse than during the immigration presentation where I accidentally shared my desktop and said, David introduction, like a PDF over in the corner before the announcement. Yeah, so that was good.
At least you can change like your background, a picture of you and him, like thumbs up.
It's funny. Did anybody ever say anything that they noticed?
They didn't,
No, I don't.
including our PNC members did not say
And they would be the ones to, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep thinking I'll get better at this, but you know.
Yeah, David and Zoom. So the Sunday afternoon Zoom with him. So that's, I don't know. Had that been announced before the email today, or is that new?
I knew about it, but I don't know that it was it announced before now? I don't think it was.
What was the announcement?
The Zoom with David Sunday afternoon.
You know, it had been, but I think it got lost. I think it was one of a number of things that got, and so we have found in the last week that people just don't know about it. So that's why there's kind of a push right now. We're hoping that there's a big group that that shows up to welcome him. All right, y'all. Can you see this now?
You can't.
Okay.
and which one is the white doll? Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and have two eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because she's black.
Which doll looks most like you? Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay. Which doll is the black doll?
Had y'all seen that before? No. I want to say that experiment was first done like in the 1950s. And it's one that has been recreated, as you can imagine, a number of times since then, kind of with the hope that there is a different result. But it's one that has been recreated since then, in which we're finding that it might get a little bit better, but not nearly as much as you would think or hope. So it's one of those things that still kind of puts a lump in my throat every time I see that. So I thought it would be a good place to begin. Actually, I want to go back to this. This is a fuller quote than the one that we saw earlier. This is an anonymous quote that's lifted up in Jennifer Harvey's book. It's a woman that says, "I've always taught my children to treat everyone with kindness and fairness, no matter who they are or what their circumstances, and my kids to have friends of a lot of different races and from different cultures. They never seemed to notice or care what race someone was until they came home from school after Martin Luther King Jr. Day last year. Then all of a sudden, they were talking about people's race all the time, saying things like, our friend Joe, he's Black, right? And I felt like they actually might have been better off without that celebration, because I really don't think it's good for them to focus on people's race and to put them in boxes. Isn't that the opposite of what we should be trying to do?" So that is, I think that Jennifer lifts this up first because it's something that we probably hear a lot, or that we might have said. It's not an uncommon sentiment, she says, among white parents. And it illustrates what we might call a color blind approach to parenting and just being, right? She says that color blindness became one of the most prominent ways to approach race and difference in the United States after the Civil Rights Movement. And its basic premise is that when it comes to race, we shouldn't notice it, we should look past it, and we should never use it as the basis of making judgments about people. A lot of which sounds, sounds really good. She says, color blindness is full of good intentions in a lot of ways. This is actually, I don't think that she said this, I think this is me. But it's like we've internalized kind of that part of Dr. King's dream. Like, we all know the line that, blessed will be the day when we're all judged not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. And a lot of color blind sort of thinking takes that, among other things, as its basis. So from there, though, she goes into kind of lay out a case against color blindness as our starting point, especially when it comes to parenting white children. So the first thing that she says is it just doesn't work. And it doesn't work first because we cannot not see race. So it is impossible not to see it unless you have a visual impairment. One of the first things that I'm in the middle of this right now, that we teach our kids are their colors. We do ABCs, we do 1, 2, 3s, we do colors. We're really struggling with colors right now. But it's one of the first things that we teach our children, right? When they're trying to bring order to their world and build a vocabulary. So children start recognizing different colors and naming them, when they're quite young. She goes on to say, within a few months of being born, babies begin to observe and absorb and even respond to the racial dimensions of our society. And she says that's a normal part of development. And finally, she says, we're all equal doesn't actually counteract racism ultimately. For young kids, especially, it's too vague for them to understand. They don't always connect that we're even talking about skin color when we use that phrase. She uses the example of, I don't know if it was her, I think it was a friend, somebody else whose son, kept wanting to talk about kind of racial issues, and she would say, well, we're all equal, we're all equal, we're all equal. And this went on for several months. And after several months, he said, Mama, what does equal mean? So that's what she's sort of getting at when she says it's too vague. So that's kind of the first part of the argument. Color blindness, it just doesn't work. And then there is this part. It says color blindness really hurts people of color. First, because it often shuts down conversations before they begin. So it's the we're all human. Why don't we just get over it and not talk about it if we're all human after all? It can often be employed kind of at the beginning of conversations that should be about noticing and responding to the long-term effects of racism. So all of those policies and practices that have led to inequality and to the disadvantage of people of color. Dr. Harvey concedes that there are different ways and different perspectives we can have about how to kind of level the playing field, but we don't ever get anywhere when we begin with, well, I don't see color. We have to see color if we want to begin that conversation. Also, kind of as, and hearkening back to that previous slide, children notice skin color. They notice it, and then their brains, of course, try to understand and assign meaning to those differences. So when their anti-racist caregivers don't supply that meaning, they're going to find that meaning. They're going to absorb it somewhere else. They're going to find it and absorb it from the culture around them. So what we don't interpret for them, society will. She lifted up this example of babies, like 3-4 months old, that were showed a bunch of pictures, just different pictures of people. These are white babies. And it showed how they lingered for a much longer time on people of color. The hypothesis being, their caregivers were their white parents, and most of the people around them were white. And so when they encountered a face that was not, it was interesting and worth lingering there for a while. And then, as early as 5, children recognize that different groups are treated differently. They notice those patterns in our society. They notice who is present in what spaces. They notice who holds what jobs. And then, like all of us do, they generalize. So if they aren't taught sort of about the inequity that they see, then how do they make sense of it? And what she's saying is that often in subtle ways, that sort of assumption that inequality is a reflection of people's intelligence or capability or skills can start, happening at a very, very young age. She actually notes a lot of examples of, I just can't share all of them with you all tonight, but, when we hear a child make just a child make a really racist, or other kind of bigoted comment, the assumption among good white progressive parents is that, they must have heard it at home, which is not always not always the case because, we are not our children's only teachers. So, and just kind of reinforces how important it is that they're getting anti-racist parenting at home to kind of counteract all the other messages that they're receiving. And then also color blindness hurts white people, right, and white children. So some of this might sound like repeat, but young children pick up on differences, right, including racial differences from a very early age, like I just said. Dr. Harvey sort of uses the example of just imagine yourself in 3 different churches and how you would feel in each of those spaces. So imagine yourself in a predominantly white church, like Idlewild. Imagine yourself then at Mississippi Boulevard in a predominantly Black church. And then imagine yourself in a, predominantly Latina church. Those spaces are going to feel different to you. So when we're talking about race, we're not just talking about skin color, but about different ways of speaking to each other and different ways of kind of holding our bodies. All of those learned ways of being. We have certainly, as kind of white North American Presbyterians, have learned how to be rather composed and only appropriately, right, emotional in church. Like if you're going to get emotional, it better just be like one glistening like tear, like don't make a scene. Whereas, a lot of Black folks in their churches have learned to be very emotive in church. And it would be inappropriate to not be emotive, especially at something like a funeral, right? So children pick up on these things no less than we do, probably even more, right? So when we tell our children that none of this matters, right, that we're all just the same, it dismisses really what they're feeling, right, in their bodies, in these spaces, and what they're noticing. She says, colorblind teaching presents as an aspiration, don't see color, a charge that is fundamentally out of sync with a child's daily experience. But I see it everywhere, right? Don't see color, but I see it everywhere. And then she goes on to say it's also distorting, it's distorting their reality, but it's also eroding the parent-child relationship when that is the response to those, to when they notice these differences. Also, long and meaningful relationships are severed when white children can't engage honestly around issues of race. And that's because race and racism, of course, matter in the lives of children of color. I think I went to a very diverse, racially diverse, socioeconomically diverse elementary school, really all of school, but elementary, especially. And I remember sort of that, I can look back and trying to trace sort of that subtle shift that happened sometime around late elementary when we were all kind of one student body, and then we just weren't. It was like we came back from summer vacation and that kind of self-segregation started. And in a way that I would have never been able to pick up on that time, I think that some of that had to do with just, it was like there was just an inauthenticity suddenly in these relationships because of where a lot of which was, I think, my Black classmates kind of coming into their own self-consciousness about how sort of different, their world was from mine in terms of what we went back to at the end of the day. And probably in ways that they couldn't name at that point too. But when I read what Jennifer says about this, I see that experience kind of playing before my eyes. So, and finally, white supremacist thinking. So this is again in ways that colorblindness hurts white people. As we talked about earlier, as early as 5 years old, children recognize that different groups are treated differently because they notice those patterns. So we said this before, they notice who is present in what spaces, who holds what jobs, and then they generalize. So if they aren't taught about the why of the inequity they see, how do they make sense of it? And often, in subtle ways, they assume that inequality is a reflection of people's intelligence or capability or skills. She also says, this was a little bit of this was probably my kind of wow moment in reading her work. There's a fundamental message on which colorblindness rests, and that's that there is something wrong with color. She says, consider the moments when white children are usually told not to notice. It's usually when they're noticing a person of color, because they don't notice and mark white in the same way. So they're not very often going to point to a white person and go, look, a white person. So it's when they're pointing at, when they're noticing a person of color. So when we, hush, hush, don't notice, when they translate that, often how they're going to hear it is, don't notice, it doesn't matter that so-and-so is Black. We should like that person. We should like that person anyway. And that implication, even though that's not the way we meant it, is how it is how it's heard. So she then goes on.
Sarah,
I'm good. Yeah.
Question or kind of comment, I guess.
Yeah.
So I've not read the book, but I mean, the whole concept of color blindness is a very privileged white position to be able to take, right? The idea that we can ignore color because it's we're all equal and just kind of don't continue to pay attention to the reality of the world. Like,
right.
I don't think I can't imagine that that's a concept that's ever taken hold in the Black community. Like, well, just, don't pay attention to color. Just look at your friends or look at people and judge them for who they are. It's fundamentally, I don't know, contrary to the reality of the society we live in. So I just think it's such a privileged position. It's like Jerry and I talk a lot about our friends from high school and social media, and kind of the things that I hear from them that I don't hear from my little circle of friends. But like the people who say, it's always about race, and they kind of bemoan the idea that things do inherently kind of hinge on race. Like it's such a privileged position to say, well, we shouldn't consider race. We shouldn't kind of contemplate it. It's just it's such a privileged position to take. So I don't know if that's.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right on. And of course, one of the reasons that white progressives have been pushed on this is because Black siblings have said, we never asked you to to not see us, right? And you're really not seeing us if you're insisting that, right? That you shouldn't.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, it's especially true when you're talking about children, because as you say, Sarah, and as Dr. Harvey said in her book, they're going to notice. They're going to notice whether we want them to or not. So no matter what kind of, we can have all these, just liberal democratic ideals that we all hold to about we're all equal and our laws should be colorblind, and then therefore our adult populace should be colorblind. All of that just goes out the window when we're talking about children. A 4-year-old who says, oh, look, we have a person in our preschool who doesn't look like me.
Right.
Why is that? You know, like that ideal is suddenly just not important anymore.
Yeah. Well, and of course we're not equal. I mean, we are and we aren't. Like, we have to be clear about what we're saying when we tell our children we're equal. Yes, we are equal in the eyes of God, right? And do we see that equality manifest? Don't say manifest to your kids, but do we see that, around us? No. Yeah. I'm going to try to kind of race through this last little part so that we can just open it up at the end here. But she then lays out race conscious parenting. And that's the term that she uses as kind of the opposite of colorblind parenting. And she says, this is an approach that insists on noticing and naming race early and often. Being race conscious means thinking about, talking about, acting in response to the recognition of race. Just do a gut check really quick, quietly, just on your own. Think about if you can think of any examples from your own childhood, and just hold it gently. I think it's a good question to ask yourself because, do we have models? Was this modeled for us? Maybe for some of us a little, maybe for some of us, no, not at all. Just hold that gently. So I'm going to give you an example here of somebody acting in a not race conscious way. So a parent is in the grocery store with his 3-year-old. His white child sees an African-American person in the same aisle. She points and says, "Look at that woman's brown skin." And the embarrassed father quickly shushes the child and whisks her away from the encounter. I think we can all agree that this is awkward. This is just an awkward encounter. It's more than that, but it's also awkward no matter how you spend it or how you respond. Take a second again, just on your own, and notice what is not good about this response. What about this would we not want to repeat with our own kids, and why?
Different colored skin is embarrassing and we need to run. I mean,
Yeah.
Isn't it beautiful, Johnny? Isn't it beautiful skin? Wow.
Yeah.
And the implication is that even discussing differences, different races is something to be ashamed of or embarrassed of, or you don't talk about that. It's just not it cuts off future conversations before they even start.
Yeah.
So we dealt with this very often when Sloan was 2, and she wanted to, this was before she was aware of like any volume in her voice, and she would very specifically describe any different skin tones that she noticed and ask all these questions about why, and very loudly. I really like Jeremy's answer. Never gave that one, but it's awkward no matter how you respond or what you say. But
well, yeah, and it's awkward because, of course, one of the first things we have to consider is whether this person is I think we're sort of assuming because of this father's reaction that this woman was within earshot and heard this. So you're not only in one of those moments where you're having to respond in this teachable moment to your child, but there's also this other person in the equation who maybe is offended, maybe isn't, but you don't know, by being pointed at, right? So yeah, it's hard. So okay, so starting with a couple of assumptions. The first being that your child's comment even though we shouldn't point, right? And we have to teach kind of along the way that we shouldn't point at people. But starting with the assumption that the comment is developmentally normal and totally appropriate, right? So starting with that assumption, and right, that we shouldn't point, and there's an appropriate way to sort of talk about people. Jeremy kind of got us started, but what would be a better way of responding in this moment? I'll let you all kind of take a stab at it, and then I'll share with you where Jennifer Harvey goes.
Just even just, being, affirming of acknowledging or noticing, calling out. It's like, that yes, that's right. Like, just don't. I think the worst thing you do is just shut it down and
shush and hurry away.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is the best way to handle it. This is the way I always did, mainly because this is how my brain thinks. But I just kind of would always talk about, all of our skin colors are different, and talk about the biological aspect, and talk about, what causes the difference in skin color.
Melanin.
Yeah. And how, oftentimes we look like our parents, and kind of we would talk about like the genetic part of it. And they actually got that from a really early age. I don't know.
Yeah, I totally empathize with this, this example that she gives, because I can imagine, we practice these skillful responses, which is part of anti-racist parenting, is that you put yourself in situations where you're having to practice it. But in the moment, it can be hard. So I have a lot of empathy for anybody that is sort of in this position. My kid is still like pre-verbal, but not really. Like he's constantly saying things. We just don't know what he's saying. And so I'm just like holding my breath for when it actually becomes like English, and like I don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. He's clearly cussing at us like half the time. So I don't know what that's going to sound like. So a lot of empathy. So the way that Jennifer responds to this is, honey, it's not polite to point at people, but yes, that woman's skin is a beautiful shade of brown. So there's something about that, the simplicity of that. And then she goes on to say again, if the comment was made within earshot, then your response probably should be made within earshot. And then it might be appropriate even, to address this person directly. So this response, it takes the child's developmental stage seriously. It doesn't load the moment with more racial tension for the child, which, it's loaded with racial tension for us because we're adults, but it's not loaded with that tension for the child. So it's an opportunity to not, unload all of our stuff on them. It also respects the woman who's been pointed at, and even engaging, with her directly about the comment is modeling something important for the child, that, even when we've been disrespectful, even unintentionally, especially in racially kind of fraught situations, we should attempt, conversation immediately. It also makes a positive meaning of the child's recognition that the woman's skin color is different, right? So there's no, I think that Ben, you said this, if our kids keep pointing out different skin colors and we're going, shh, I mean, how do they, the translation is there's something bad, about this. So to say, yeah, Yeah, it is. It is. It's darker. It's a beautiful shade of brown. It's different and beautiful. Yeah. All right, real quick. So she kind of lists near the end some principles for race conscious parenting rather than colorblind parenting. The first is to seek out and even create opportunities to address not just race, but racism proactively and on a regular basis. And this is just as much for us as it is for them, because we get better at it when we practice it, so that we don't just panic in the grocery store when our kids do awkward things. Conduct a deep reading of the actual racial environment. So the racial dimensions of all of our experiences and places and spaces and relationships are engaged. 3, assume children can and should be taught about each other's particular and complex experiences. So she uses the example of, most white children are going to be told, police are safe. All police are safe. We want them, we want them to trust police, to go to police. There's a reason, right, that we tell our kids this. But when there is no attempt to sort of explain how a parent of color might teach or might have the same conversation with their child, we're not teaching our kids how to empathize or how to locate themselves kind of in really what is a social hierarchy or a racial hierarchy. This is hard to do. So, and she doesn't, that reality is not negating, she is not negated in her writing. It's just, but it is something nevertheless that she lifts up and says we have to learn how to do this, because kids are getting to college, they're getting into my college classes and they can't engage with each other at all. And one of the reasons is because they have had these completely opposite conversations growing up. And then they're just incredulous. I mean, they just, and they don't really want to deal with each other. It's just, it's too jarring. And then 4, engage in honest dialogue about the inherited experience of being white and the history of whiteness. Again, kind of helps them to take seriously their location in a racial hierarchy that privileges them. So I can't believe it's actually 8:50. I didn't think that we had that much content, but what do y'all think about this? You don't have to use these questions. I just kind of popped them up there in case they were helpful.
The thing that kept coming to my mind as we were talking about this and remembering a couple of years ago when I read the book, you teach kids appropriate to their age level, right? So a child who is, ours are 3rd graders now, right? So you approach all of this very differently than you would May, right? So May's going to look at it and just see the differences, and you don't go a whole lot deeper than that, and then you just celebrate the differences and maybe start to place yourself and explain the position of privilege that you have a little bit. But when you're in 3rd grade, or even maybe Sloan's 7. Okay, so you start to really, you learn history a little bit, right? And you start to learn kind of the context that we're living in. And with our kids this year, with the murder of George Floyd and just all of the events of the summer, we just thought, let's just broaden this context a little bit more. And we decided ultimately maybe the best way to do that was to start learning more in depth about what happened during the civil rights movement. And okay, this is what our Black and brown brothers and sisters had to go through to get just the basic rights that we have now. And we bought John Lewis's illustrated novels, graphic novels, essentially, that he created for not just children, anyone to learn about the civil rights movement. And there's stark language in there. The N-word is used. It's very stark, and the violence is just very clearly portrayed. But we thought, as we were kind of going through this with them, that if they didn't see this, they won't understand the context in which they're living through, the context that they're seeing Black Lives Matter signs, and that they're hearing about Black people who are being murdered by police. So I don't know that it was the right move. Maybe they're too young for that, but I think they came away from it with just a better understanding of the context that we're in. So I think it's that context. Once they get just a little bit older, putting the context in, the historical context is important. And then that allows us to be not just race conscious in our everyday interactions, but race conscious in a kind of a broader sense as well, as we live our lives.
Yeah.
I think this was last year in kindergarten. But remember Sloan coming home from school after Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month, and talking about some of the things that she learned and understanding conceptually, in a way, that there was a point in time where the laws weren't the same for white people and for Black people, and just the unfairness, the injustice of it all resonated with her. Really, I mean, she understood that just out of the gate, that at a very surface level, obviously it's not fair that people are not being treated fairly the same just because of their skin color, and that opened up a lot of conversations we could have with her. At the appropriate level, right? Like understanding that people were treated differently for no reason other than the fact that they were instead of white. I think we had some really interesting conversations with her, and kind of seeing her wrap her head around that idea, and kind of the reflex to realize, like, hey, that's not right. Like, why would that be the case? I think it laid the groundwork for more meaningful conversations. But it's really interesting trying to navigate, like, what's the right level, right? Like, not only were people not treated fairly, they had to sit in different parts of the bus or go through different doors, but the point you broach the subject of, no, people were murdered, and people were assaulted, and
So I feel like St. Mary's handled it really well, because they, in a good way, they may have pushed us to talk about some things that we may not have thought Sloan was ready to hear. So the month of February at chapel, each month or each week of the month, a different speaker. It was either a Black teacher or parent would do a lesson in chapel, read a book, and then they would talk about it at chapel, and then there would be like take home things to kind of just discuss further at home. I don't know, I thought it was really helpful, because I'm not sure I would have gone quite, I didn't think she was capable, I guess, of handling some of these very hard to hear things. And she would be talking about them kind of all week. Like, you could see her little brain, like, just mulling it over, like, each day and kind of asking more questions. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think maybe they're ready to hear things earlier than maybe we think, especially your firstborn. They're ready to hear things earlier than you think they are.
And I think that reinforces the idea that they're perceiving things that we don't know they're perceiving, right? Like they're capable of, maybe not, obviously they don't understand the full context, but they're grasping a lot more than I think, I for sure gave Sloan at 6 and 7 credit for. And it's just it's amazing what they're capable of.
I try to remember that with kids whenever I'm talking with them, that, you know, for, let's say, for every 2 words that they're articulating, there are like 10 more that are right there, you know. Like there's so much that they're thinking that they're not expressing, whether they're doing that intentionally or not, but there's a whole world there, you know, that we're not privy, you know, to seeing. It's terrifying.
You know, I'm reading that first question, the colorblind approach. I mean, it wasn't used when I was a child because I attended what could now be described as a segregation academy, right? Private school. So there was no need for it when there
Where
were
did you go?
ECS here in Memphis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And, you know, it was actually a big deal when the first Black student at our elementary school was admitted. Like, oh, there's finally a Black student here. Well, this is going to be different and weird. So it wasn't used because it wasn't necessary, because we weren't around any children of color at all.
So I've got something like on my mind that I can't really like see past right now. But I just keep thinking like, you know, on Saturday, we're going to a gender reveal for some friends of ours who are having a big
Outdoors, mask, social distance.
drive through, like
To be clear.
It's the same.
you just like drive through and see I don't even know how they're doing it. Anyway, so they're Black and they're having both are Black and they're having their second child. And when she was pregnant with their first child, she expressed, not just to me, but there were a few of us there, like her fear of having a boy. And it just gut punched me. I mean, I've never really thought about that. You know, when you're having your first child, you want to be thinking about you don't care if it's a boy or a girl, you just want this healthy child and this amazing future. And she just kept saying, it needs to be a girl. It needs to be a girl. I'm scared of what a boy looks like. And that was, or what his future looks like. And that was 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. Now they're having their second child. And I just keep thinking, you know, now things are kind of worse in a lot of ways, or at least they're just kind of bubbled to the surface. And I just hope there's joy in whatever it is. And I can't help but think, you know, we're having this conversation about like a colorblind approach, but I guarantee you they're never going to have that type of conversation with, you know, their children. I don't know. It's just a reality check, I guess.
Yeah. They're not under the illusion of color blindness. Right? They know that it matters.
I mean, they deal with race every single day of their lives.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's
One of the, sorry.
sorry. Like Jeremy mentioned, giving them context, but also very important to point out their privilege that, you know, things still aren't the way they need to be. And that obviously came up in our conversations about George Floyd and police brutality in general. And then we would discuss, you know, discrimination when people are trying to get jobs, and how there can be a white person and a Black person who are equally qualified for a job, and that employer will just decide to hire the white person. And, you know, just talking about everyday discrimination that Black people have to face, or just non-white people have to face, that, you know, our kids are not going to have to worry about because they're white. And so most white people are able to just ignore that because it doesn't affect them. And people of color or children of color don't have that option of, ignoring the problem because they live with it and it affects them every day.
Yeah. It makes me think of that video that we watched at the beginning. Like, I wonder if those kids, those Black kids that keep choosing the white doll when they're asked which one is pretty, which one is good, which one do you like how aware are they in that moment of how much they've internalized the racism, kind of the smog that we're all swimming in. And even was that a moment of recognition? I don't know. I think they're probably too young, but it's mind blowing to me in a way. I also wonder, the conversation about racial privilege, about white racial privilege, is such a hard one to have with a lot of adults if they haven't, they kind of feel like, I know there are people at Ottawa that feel like we're just beating them over the head with it right now. Can we stop talking about this? It's hard. It's a hard conversation to have with adults. My intuition is that it's not as hard to have with kids because they sort of, we have this conversation with them all the time to a certain extent. With adults, it goes immediately to shame and guilt, and you're telling me I'm a terrible person. Well, no, I'm not telling you that you're a terrible person, right? Or that your people are terrible people. With kids, we're always saying something to the effect of, you're not a bad person. You did a bad thing. Like, this is bad. This is bad behavior, but you're not a bad person. Which, to a certain extent, when we're talking about white privilege, that's what we're talking about. So I think that they just get that, intuitively without a whole lot of explaining. And I don't know, the earlier that we can do that, it seems like we would be saving ourselves some trouble later on.
Well, I feel like the conversation is so much more prevalent now. Like, I don't think that didn't exist in the mainstream for sure when we were growing up. But I think part of the reason people get so defensive about it is because it's, a lot of adults have gotten to wherever they are in their lives, and then all of a sudden that they're taking this concept of white privilege as some sort of an assault on what they've done, and it's always, I feel like white privilege always gets very personal when it's a very macro concept, and I think people look at it like, well, wait a minute, no, I earned A, B, and C, or I had it hard even though I'm white. How can white privilege possibly exist? And it gets very, very personal very quickly. Whereas I think the conversations are happening so much more now, and it's so much more prevalent. It's such a, maybe it's the circles that we run in, but it feels like it's such a foregone conclusion at this point, as opposed to some concept that I feel like it will be the conversation will shift. And I hate the idea that so much generation is going to take time to really sink in, and for our kids to grow up and have this, these concepts have been just part of their being for their entire lives, as opposed to being 37 and trying to reshape your worldview. It's a different world. I mean, it will change over time, but yeah, I just feel like having this conversation with the kids now, them being aware of the reality, is just such a, I don't know, it's how you plant the seeds for change, but it's a long, slow process.
Speaking of the circles that we run in, Ben, does that include the people on Facebook that you and I have talked about?
Yeah.
Those people aren't in his world anymore. He just unfriend,
Yeah,
unfriend.
I'll do some
And
every
snooze them for a while.
I want to get my heart rate up. I'll go follow some.
Did you know you can follow people for like a month? That's an option.
I'd use that option.
No, I deleted my Facebook 4 years ago, so no, I don't
That's
do that.
smart. That's smart. I find, yeah. No, I learned about this fairly recently, and I think there's something a little brilliant about it. Like if you know that you're constantly having that, I shouldn't type, oh, I'm not gonna engage in that. I'm going, you know, if you're constantly doing that. Is that Ben?
Yeah, but my new favorite pastime, piling on in Ted Cash's defense with his Facebook posts, because he I don't know if you guys
Wait, who?
Ted Cash.
Ted Cashin?
Oh, Ted, yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, I don't know. I guess he worked in finance, but he's got a very conservative group of friends.
Oh.
So he'll post things that are very liberal, and they'll come out of the woodwork. I'll like randomly drop in and like link an article that totally.
Okay. You're one of those. You go on to okay. You engage the people on other friends, yeah.
I can't see anybody's minds in those conversations, but it's just fun. It's for sport.
You might be doing him a favor, you know, when he has to drop out. Oh man. All right, y'all. Well, Ben, I think that you ended us on a hopeful note. So, y'all, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah,
This
thanks,
is
Sarah.
fun. I kind of like the small group thing.
Me too. And that book really is, from what I've read of it, I don't recall finishing it, but it is really excellent.
It's so good.
Dr. Harvey's very,
Yeah.
very
And
good.
we're actually going to be using, she wrote a book before this one called Dear White Christians. And it's all about kind of taking apart that reconciliation paradigm that, you know, when we've used that for so long, but we never did atonement. So we can't really do reconciliation without repentance. And I mean, I'm sort of murdering this right now. I'm making it too simplistic, but that's kind of the premise of that book. So we're going to be digging into that starting in January as well.
Awesome.
She's real good.
Very
All
good.
right, y'all. Well, have a good night.
Are you feeling better, Sarah? You look
I
better.
am. Yeah, I'm feeling a lot better. Gosh, was that just last night? Yeah. Yeah, it's been 24 hours and I do feel better. So thank you.
Look better. You physically look better.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wearing it last night, the wear and tear. But yes, I do feel much better. Thank you.
I enjoyed talking to Will, so that was fun.
He was a little surprised. He was finishing up. They do their like anti-racism class via Zoom on Wednesday nights. And so I had like hit play and I was up in my attic and just let the Zoom roll and like walked away and went to bed. And so, but I'm like trying really hard not to fall asleep because I know that like y'all are rolling and somebody has to come close the meeting. And so I'm trying to stay awake for, you know, for when he's done and he gets done and, you know, I can tell he's like, oh, okay, done with the evening. He's like coming in, pouring a bourbon, you know, and I'm like, honey, I need you to go close my class. He was very gracious, but yeah. I'm glad you guys got to see him too. All right, y'all. Have a good night and I will
Good night,
see you
y'all.
later.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Bye.